Beyond their abandonment of traditional media, their embrace of new technology, their thirst for education, and their paradoxical sense of entitlement and social responsibility, millennials share other characteristics throughout the world. So let's explore these generational qualities. Millennials are more likely than prior generations to shop abroad and to purchase products online. This is both a benefit and a risk for existing business. It is a potential benefit because consumers may be located anywhere in the world, not just in one's own community or country. It is a risk because competition is global, and local businesses are not insulated from foreign competition or from better quality or cut-rate products. Businesses should market to millennials throughout the world to harvest these new customers. As to political preference, throughout the world, millennials are more liberal than prior generations. This is partly the exuberance and rebellion of youth, but it is much more than that. Millennials are exposed to and informed about the whole world and more ready to adopt new ways of thinking and behaving than their parents' generation. They have a great distrust of institutions. Millennials are not total rebels and want to retain many cultural customs and practices. They are dissatisfied with many government policies and are much more ready to protest than any generation since the 1960s. Throughout the world, from Egypt and Tunisia to Argentina and Brazil, millennials are uncomfortable with the status quo, particularly with corruption or economic disparities. They are agents of social change and may not be tolerant of standard or old-fashioned practices. Millennials in Europe, North America, and Latin America are far less religious than prior generation. No generation has a lower level of religious belief and participation than millennials. In Northern Europe, religion and churches are treated as historic, but not sacred entities, where real religious ceremonies are conducted. While religion has not disappeared in Latin America or North America, it is clearly waning. Millennials are less racist than prior generations. In my classes, virtually all my students have dated someone of another race. Surveys show that most millennials have dated outside their racial group, and interethnic and interracial marriage is at an all-time high in most countries. In a recent Pew survey, interracial marriage in the United States increased from 2% in the 1960s to almost 16% presently. Millennials are not as nationalistic as their predecessors. They are less likely to think that their country is better than any other country, or that they are exceptional or chosen people. The Pew Global Survey in the US, 68% of those 65 and older agree with the statement, "Our people are not perfect, but our culture is superior," while only 49% of those 18 to 29 agree. The generation gap in Western Europe and the Americans are similar. More than half of Western Europeans, 53%, are culturally chauvinistic, compared with only 1 in 3, 32%, of their younger counterparts. The difference between generations is particularly apparent in France, where only 21% of those under age 30 support the notion of cultural superiority, while 56% of those aged 65 and older say that French culture is superior. For several generations, nationalism racism, and ethnic discrimination has been reduced, and millennials may be ushering in a greater degree of ethnic and racial tolerance than ever before. And perhaps most interestingly, millennials believe they can create change. According to the Telefonica Global Study of Millennials, nearly half of them worldwide believe that one person's participation makes a difference. That number reaches its pinnacle in Latin America and North America, where 58% and 60% respectively of millennials think that one person can make a political difference. And 62% of Latin American millennials think that they can make a global difference, the highest of any region. The highest numbers are in Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Venezuela, where more than 2/3 of millennials believe they can make a difference globally. That is a stunning sense of self-efficacy that we have not witnessed since the baby boomers of the 1960s thought it was possible to change the world. That sense of empowerment is a potent force that bodes well for the future, especially in the Western Hemisphere. As to work ethic, while millennials across the world want to balance lifestyle and work and are afraid to emulate many workaholic boomer parents, they are not lazy. Around the world, more than 2/3 of millennials believe they have an opportunity to be an entrepreneur in their country, according to the Telefonica study. This is a stunning expectation that is a huge opportunity for millennials across the world. The fact that so many members of this generation believe in their ability to be innovative, competitive, and self-directed is a predisposition that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you do think you can start a business or be an entrepreneur, you won't even make an attempt. Innovation starts with the belief that you can invent and construct your own organization. While millennial-initiated businesses will often be disruptive, they are the future. The world and its economy are changing fast, and those that are not on the cutting edge of new opportunity will be left behind. But millennials want an interesting work that makes a difference. The Brookings Institute survey found that 2/3 of millennials would rather have a $40,000 a year job that they love than a $100,000 a year job that they think is boring. Clearly, millennials want a good life-work balance. It is important not to confuse boredom with mundane employment and laziness. Millennials want a challenge, an enjoyable and an entertaining job, and a chance to make a difference. They are not willing to hold on to a job they hate. Creating jobs that meet the expectation of millennials will be a major challenge for organizations for the next several decades. Regarding loyalty, working for a single organization for one's life, or even for decades, increasingly will be a thing of the past. The thought of slowly working one's way up through the organization, finally getting the executive parking space, the corner office, and getting a golden wristwatch at retirement is not even considered by Gen Xers and millennials. The decline in organization loyalty started with the boomers, increased in Generation X, and is virtually gone in the millennial generation. According to a Nielsen survey, millennials are twice as likely to leave their jobs after 2 years than members of Generation X. Business organizations must think resourcefully about creating meaningful companies with challenges, significance, impacts, and delight about going to work. The disaffiliation from organization and institutions extends to politics and government. Over half of the millennials in the U.S. are political independents, not affiliated with a political party. Throughout the world, a majority of millennials think their government does not reflect their values and beliefs. This is particularly true in Latin America and Europe, where nearly 2/3 think that government does not represent their values and beliefs. This suggests that in these regions in particular, there may be major upheaval in politics and government. Across the next few decades, people in Latin America will elect or revolt to change governments to make them more reflective of their own beliefs and values. Government leaders should initiate reforms or they will risk rejection by their younger constituents. A majority of millennials on every continent think that more regulations on the private sector will drive economic growth. This will reverse a trend across many developed countries for less government regulation. Among those with the most support for more regulations on the private sector are Latin American millennials, where nearly 2/3 support more, not less, government regulation. Institutional religion has also declined substantially in the millennial generation. 1/3 of the millennials in the U.S. now claim no religious affiliation, and in Northern Europe, less than 10% are affiliated with a formal religion. Worldwide, only 12% of millennials say they are more religious than their parents, whereas 50% of millennials say they are less religious than their parents, and 80% say they would marry people with different religious beliefs. These are very consistent findings across the world, with the exception of the Middle East. However, even in the Middle East, over half of millennials would consider marrying someone with different religious beliefs. This represents a major departure from prior millennial Eastern or Middle Eastern generations and is another indication of the potential for the millennial generation to create change. These views represent a major challenge for corporations, businesses, churches, and educational institutions, since the large millennial generation is far less likely to have any allegiance to any institution. For business in particular, this is a challenge. Employee turnover is costly, and business must find incentives such as pay, profit sharing, facilities, perquisites, community involvement, flex time, or work-life balance to retain employees. Boomers and Gen Xers will work longer because they have to. Boomers will work as coaches, consultants, and part-time employees. For millennials, traditional retirement seems elusive. Nearly 40% of millennials globally think that they will have to work indefinitely and will not have enough money to retire comfortably. However, European and American millennials are most pessimistic about retirement. About half think they will never be able to retire, whereas only 19% of Latin American millennials think that they will have to work indefinitely. On the other hand, millennials are changing the nature of sex, marriage, and children in a number of ways. The sexual revolution may have begun in the 1960s, but it has reached its peak among millennials. Casual sex is more common among millennials than any generation. Millennials are marrying later than any previous generation. While traditionally women married in their late teens or early 20s, marriage occurs much later among millennials. 50 years ago, the median age for marriage for women in the US was 20. Now it is 27. 50 years ago, the median age of marriage for men was 22. Now it is 29. Many millennials are waiting until their 40s to get married. And an increasing number of millennials are not marrying at all. In the United States, it is projected that 25% of millennials will not ever marry. While many millennials are living together in romantic relationships, the institution of marriage has been in decline, especially in Europe, where the marriage institution is endangered, but also in the US, where marriage is sharply declining. Like other institutions discussed previously, for many millennials, marriage seems like an outdated institution. These demographics are impacting and disrupting the world in a number of ways. While marriage was once a marker of stability, particularly for employers, that is not true for millennials. They are waiting much longer to marry and to have children. Unmarried millennials are more educated and entrepreneurial than their married counterparts. So being married is a poor marker of a good, competent employee, a real departure from the past. Throughout the world, particularly in the most affluent countries like the United States, Europe, and Japan, the birth rate is dropping sharply. In many of these countries, the population is actually shrinking as deaths outnumber births. Many couples are choosing not to have children. Since women are marrying later and having their first child later, they are less likely to have large families. This is causing economic problems for retirement programs as the shrinking number of workers cannot sustain an increasing number of seniors and their pension programs. Young single people and young married people traditionally like to live in urban areas, and millennials are clearly following this pattern. However, it is common for middle-aged married couples, especially after they had children, to move to the suburbs. While millennials may still follow this pattern, the move to the suburbs will be delayed by the later date of their marriage and later start of having children. Thus, the patterns of residential habitation are likely to change, with urban areas experiencing the most growth. Finally, these are difficult times, and it would be easy to conclude that with economic problems, epidemics, global terrorism, and international tensions, that millennials would be pessimistic about their future. Such is not necessarily the case. A poll of 6,700 millennials across Latin America, the United States, and Western Europe show that millennials are not chronically unhappy, with 72% of Latin Americans thinking their best days are ahead, compared to 50% in Western Europe and the United States. Indeed, 62% of Latin American millennials are very optimistic about the future, as opposed to just 43% in the United States and just 22% in Europe. While there is much similarity among millennials around the world, this survey is a cautionary note that we should not paint with too broad a brush across country and culture. But like other generations before them, millennials will change the world, and the world institutions must change to accommodate this large and pioneering generation. Thank you.